Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host. Today, I'm glad to be joined by Ryan McCrea, who is an HR leader with over 20 years of experience in transformational learning, talent management, and talent development at executive levels in fast-paced organizations and companies of all sizes. For the last 2 years, he's been the head of learning and development at Ameren. And today we're going to talk about his journey, what he's seen in terms of a leadership culture at Ameren, and some future threats or potential possibilities, opportunities for the learning and development field moving forward. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to the program, Ryan.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Charles.
Love for our listeners to learn more about you. So remind our listeners or tell our listeners a little bit more about your background and what got you passionate in this field.
Yes. So I actually went and got my undergrad in psychology. While I was getting my undergrad in psychology, I found IO psychology. And I was super excited when I found that because I did not want to be a clinical psychologist and I did not want to be a professor. But that's what everyone was trying to push me towards. So once I found IO psychology, I'm like, just the lights turned on. I'm like, this is what I want to do. And so what I often tell people is what I do is I take psychological concepts. I'm a business psychologist. I take psychological concepts and I put them into the business world to make the business world better, whether that's individuals, whether that's teams, whether that's organizations. I want them to be successful, and I want them to be successful through their people and the way that they do their work. And so that's really what I'm hoping to do. And so I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations over the last few years. I've, as you mentioned, been in HR for about 20. I think the only thing I haven't done is payroll. And believe me, nobody wants me doing that. So it's a good thing that I haven't. But I've kind of went at different organizations. I started out in a nonprofit, worked in more the HR generalist area. I did everything from put a new system in to teach them about analytics to getting a chance to build a comp program from ground up, which is not something I would have thought I would have ever done after I got my master's in IO Psych, but I did. It was a good experience. I moved on from there into a company called Brown Shoe that is now called Caleres. They own all the famous footwear stores across the country and a whole bunch of wholesale brands. I worked there for about 4.5 years too, and mostly started in the HR business kind of partner area, that talent management area. But quickly after 6 months in, my boss left. And so I ended up taking over assessments. I took over the talent assessment process, and I also took over performance management. So that was when I really started getting and using that degree. And so loved it. Got a chance to spend some time there and moved on from there. And then my next place that I worked was Monsanto. And so I spent some time working at Monsanto. They're now Bayer. They've been taken over by Bayer since then. Worked in HR metrics and analytics, and then spent some time as an HR business partner in the biotech part of the business. So in that part of the business, I was on 4 leadership teams with PhD level scientists. Very interesting people, very smart people, not always smart about people. So it was fun. It was great to be on those teams. And when I said I was on those teams, I was in 10 hours of meetings a week. So, I mean, they didn't make a whole lot of people or business decisions without me there. It was nice. I was in one of those roles where you actually have a seat at the table. Wonderful time. We got a chance to focus on that. The roles there were nice. I got a chance to do a lot of TD work as well. So it wasn't just the traditional HR business partner work. We had a fairly small TD department for a 20,000 person global organization. So because I had that skill set, I was able to use it in my day-to-day as well. Soon after we got bought by Bayer, Commerce Bank reached out to me. So I spent about 4.5, 5 years being their VP of talent development in that area. So I generally focused on learning and leadership development, which is the thing that I love. It's what I've been doing a lot for the past 8 to 10 years. And so I spent 4.5 years there, really focused on career development when I came in. When I started, they had about a 65% favorable rating on their career development scores on their employee engagement survey. By the time I left, it was 82. So I put like a 4-year strategy in of how we were going to roll things out to really help them increase and focus on career development, and made them one of the best development organizations, development banks in the Midwest and really almost across the country when it came to really focusing on that. Loved it, but it was time for me to move on. Did a short stint in tech. I won't talk much about that, but I worked at a company called Atlassian. And then I more recently, of course, jumped over to Ameren and still doing very similar things, what I love, which is learning and leadership development. So that's where I've been, like you mentioned, about the last year and a half, 2 years at Ameren, helping them continue to grow their learning function.
Love that story. A lot of great experience and expertise you have that brings to the table a lot of different experiences throughout different industries. Let's talk about Ameren and that learning culture that's at Ameren, maybe when you started, and how have you really developed or changed it during your time there?
Sure. So, you know what? Learning is definitely alive and well at Ameren. So, the thing that's really interesting about our culture is that like me and my team of 3 people are not the only people doing learning in this organization. Like, we have about 100 to 150 people doing learning across Ameren because of what we do. Like, we're an energy company, we deal with electricity, we deal with gas. Safety is a huge part of what we do at Ameren. And so there is a lot of technical training that needs to go on with individuals out there to make sure that they're doing their job safely, correctly, and making sure that they're doing it right for the public as well. So there's a really broad learning community. And we all work together quite a bit. I would say that I think we've continued to work together even more. This is a really important part of Ameren. And in fact, our CEO even sees it that way, which is why he came here, Charles. Because one of the things that I asked in the interview process is like, tell me about how learning is important at this organization. Well, they told me, okay, well, we're actually working on a learning transformation team that we have individuals from all these different parts of the business that we're pulling together because our CEO sees this as important. They see it as that opportunity. It's one of those levers that you really need to pull to make sure that you're an employer of choice. And so they really want to focus on learning and leadership development. We've been in a project for the last year and will probably be for the next couple of years to try to make sure that we can even have more consistency because 150 people doing learning is a lot of people.
I
And talk
agree.
about the inconsistencies that could potentially happen there, the different ways of doing things, different backgrounds that people even get into learning. Some have a very traditional background like myself. Some of them were linemen that, you know, decided to take a different career path, or maybe they got hurt and they couldn't do that job anymore. And so they had this great skill set they could bring to the classroom. We have all these types of individuals, all different backgrounds doing learning in the organization. So that is a big part of what we're doing right now. It's just how can we even get more consistency and focus and governance around learning to make it even more powerful than it already is currently?
And I hear this a lot from L&D leaders too. When they move into new positions, they always want to know what's the learning culture like in the new organization, the potential organization they're moving into. And often they get lip service to say, learning's important. People are our most valuable asset, but they don't really show it in tangible ways, right? So it's not really demonstrated very effectively. But it sounds like that's not the case at Ameren, which is great. Having a much larger team, even though there's 3 in the L&D department, it's having over 100 learning professionals really is a nice problem to have for many organizations. But like you said, you have to kind of coordinate them, right? They have to be
Mhm.
reinforcing one another. So you're all moving collectively in the right direction.
100%. Yep. And we'll talk about one of the programs that we get a chance to really kick off here more recently. And we did that actually by having a cross-organizational group of different learning professionals from across. So we've done some really great things and great work even recently, just partnering with each other across the organization to really make sure that we can take the organization to the next level when it comes to learning.
Now, walk me through the leadership pipeline at Ameren. How does that develop from when do you have a new and emerging leader program, which I know this already, but for our listeners, because you and I have spoken before, but kind of walk our listeners through that process and how a leader develops into more senior roles.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, anytime that I started an organization, Charles, I'm kind of a detective. I want to know as much as I can about that organization, how they're growing leaders, in what ways they're growing leaders, what are the different kind of stops on that leadership pipeline as we think about all of that. And for me, it starts all the way at the beginning, kind of soup to nuts. Right from the beginning, who are those emerging leaders? How are you finding them? How are you helping people understand what it is to be a leader in the organization, what it means to be a good leader, and then how you really can help them understand what their why is. Is being a leader their right thing for them? So I often start with thinking about emerging leaders. And then that next step, that next group are the people that are leaders. So those people that are recently getting promoted, maybe they're getting hired into the organization. So those are your new leaders. And how are you continuing to grow and develop your new leaders? Then I think of once they're in that and they're a little bit past that new stage, you do have all these first and second line leaders, the middle management people often talk to them about. I prefer the mighty middle. I think they're the mighty middle of any organization because nothing happens without that group. No matter how good your executives are, how good your officers are, if you don't have a strong mighty middle, forget about it. You're just not going to be able to do the things that you need to. You're not going to be as productive, and you're probably not going to be as successful as an organization either. So I think you have that group, and that can be, of course, can be anyone that's like maybe a year into the role all the way up to being a manager for 10, 15, 20 years. At Ameren, one of the things that I would say kind of had that next level for us is when someone kind of hits that director level. They call that the alt, or the Ameren leadership team. And so that is our directors kind of in the organization. These are usually people that are managing managers. And then we have that next level, which we call our officers. And then, like most organizations, we have an executive leadership team. So we have that highest level, those chiefs that are kind of driving the organization. So it's really thinking about all of that pipeline, and then really understanding what are the offerings and opportunities for different individuals in those different parts. Because, the need of a director, of course, is very different than the need of a first line supervisor. And so how are we developing those people? How are we growing them? What are the things that we're offering to them? And I think for me, anytime I start an organization, is just understand that from the beginning to the end. And where are we really spending our time and our energy? Where are we looking at programs? What are we doing programmatically? And then how are we developing people in and outside of programs? Because programs aren't the only thing. I think sometimes organizations get really caught up in like, everything needs to be a program. Really, not necessarily the only way to develop and grow people. So we have some really good focus around a new leader development program called Emerging Leaders. That's very, very new. We're not new to growing new leaders in the organization, but the pandemic definitely hit us a little bit because we had a in-person program. Obviously, there was almost 2 years there where people weren't around. And then we had to focus our energy on really helping people get a chance to learn how to lead in a pandemic that they had never thought they would ever lead that way, especially in an organization where most people definitely were meeting in person. Like, this wasn't an organization that was full of a whole bunch of remote employees and remote managers. There just wasn't. So there was a skill set around helping build and grow that first. And we even had a little bit of turnover on the L&D team. So there was a few stops and starts before we got a chance to relaunch a new leader program out there. But like I said, I'm glad to say that we've got one that started 5/1. It is a mix between synchronous and asynchronous. And it is about a 9-month program. It's an average about a 3.5, hour investment a month. And we just kicked off a couple of our first sessions, especially our key ones. So leading the Ameren way, which is kind of our way of saying like, what does a good leader look like? And then we had leader essentials talent processes. So helping people understand a little bit more about our talent processes, the succession planning, the performance process, the hiring process, the development process, all of those. So how do we help people understand some of that? So we've got a lot of different programs, one for high potentials that are probably going to become managers. We have a program called LDC, or Leadership Development Challenge, for managers that are going to become directors. And we have a program too for directors and senior directors that we have kind of redesigned recently here this year that helps people get to that VP level as well. So we've got a lot under me. I've got 5 different programs and LinkedIn Learning. It kind of falls under my umbrella.
Wow. Thank you for that overview. Lots going on there. I'm curious because I always get this question posed by a lot of L&D leaders because they want to know in other organizations, how are they driving behavior change, right? Because for so long, training and development, learning and development, you got the smile sheets, people like the training, but when they get back to work, there's those well-grooved habits that they just default to, and the learning doesn't stick. What have you found that really makes the learning stick, and how are you doing that within Ameren?
Yeah, I think you have to follow up with people a little bit more too. So even sometimes with programs, what I've seen is that you've got an employee that is in a program, but really you don't know anything that's going on there. And even as a manager, you might not even see that you have a responsibility there. And you do. So one of the things that I think we've done traditionally and we've kind of reinvigorated recently is when we do have people that are going through programs, letting our managers and doing a kickoff session with them saying, hey, here's your responsibility. It's not just that you've got Bob in the program, but here's how we want you to support Bob. We want to make sure that you're talking to him about the experiences, that he's bringing them back, that you're giving him opportunities and experiences to use them, that you know what's going on and the things that he is working on, that you're having conversations about ways that he's learning and what has he learned and how is he going to lead his team differently. So it's important. So we now have been plugging in more and really letting managers know, one, up front, what our expectation of them in the program is too, not just the people that are in it. and that we expect them to be having conversations, that we expect them to be connecting. And then also then making sure that we're following up with them and letting them know what's going on. So we are doing like quarterly newsletters that helps them understand what are going on in these programs. Here's even some talking points to make sure that you're touching base with your people to understand what some of this looks like. So for us, that's a big one, is making sure that we are really setting the expectations of leaders, because I think sometimes if you do have a program like that, they just might not even know what their role or what they're supposed to be doing in it in the first place. We also, I'm doing this a lot in our program called Leads, which is like a program for anyone that's a manager at the organization that's been there for more than 12 months. It's very self-service. You decide when to sign up for it. You kind of walk yourself through the process. The one thing that's been nice there too is that we're doing a lot of follow-up. So if we have a session on change management, for those next couple weeks, we're going to follow up with you with some of those tools and remind you of them. See if you're using them. Reinforce that, hey, this was something that you learned. Have you gotten a chance to go back and actually use it yet? Because I think that's part of it. You have to set up the culture. And so it's great to learn, but we all know, what is it? Ebbinghouse's kind of idea of like that learning goes away very, very quickly. And that the way for you to really make sure that it sticks around longer is you have to go back and review it again and make sure that you're learning it again. And then it starts going down and then you go back. But every time that you do that, you retain more and more of it. And so I think if you're plugging back in with people, reminding them of what they learned, it's not just I went, I checked it off, I'm done. Whether that's getting the managers to focus on it, whether that's getting their team and their culture to focus on it, or even if it's us following up with them to remind them of those things and making sure that they're plugging in with it, that's just important. We know that psychologically, people don't keep that in their head. Like you have to reinforce it at least up to 3 times before people keep a higher percentage of it in their head.
Yeah, some great advice and some best practices that I've heard from other companies. You're right. Manager support and accountability is essential, especially their direct supervisor. Because if they're not supporting it, if they're not following up like what you mentioned and really holding them accountable for these learnings, it's likely not going to happen. And I had another interview with someone else that said, when you read a book, you don't read a book one time and think you're going to absorb it. You have to go back to it to really absorb those concepts and try to apply those learnings. I mean, think about it when you were in school. It wasn't, I read Romeo and Juliet once, got it, done, let's move on, right? It doesn't happen that way. So I love that constant reinforcement to counteract the effects of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, to make sure that those nudges are there so people are reminded. And most importantly, the one thing that I also note from a lot of people saying is it needs to fit within my workflow, Charles, right? It's something that needs to be relevant and timely, because I don't have time just to know stuff just for the sake of knowing it. I mean, there's a few areas everyone has an interest in, right? But usually in this area, that's not one of those. So as long as it's relevant and timely and fits in their workflow, that seems to really help reinforce the learning. And that's kind of what we do here at IMS, is these learning journeys that really focus on application. We want you to not only know more, but also do more.
We all talk about the 70-20-10, but you're learning that 10 in the classroom, but how does it become part of your 70? And if you
Absolutely.
can make that happen, it'll stick in your head a little bit longer and you'll actually keep it. It'll become muscle memory.
You're right. I wish more companies did that and were so diligent with that process, because it takes a lot of work on your end to make sure that that follow-up is done and that culture is built. Why don't we talk about a learning initiative? It could be the one that you talked about in your presentation with other L&D leaders at IMS about a month ago. But talk to me about one that you're excited about, that you've seen some movement, some behavior change as a result.
Yeah, I think the biggest one for us that we are still super excited about, it's still so fresh because, it just launched 23 days ago, was Elevate. So that was a wonderful endeavor to be able to jump into. Again, we knew we needed it. We had done that before. We've had new leader development programs before. It wasn't new to us, but it was kind of like, how do we do this for now? Where it's in a different world, leadership looks different. We want to make sure that we're readying and preparing our new leaders and promoted leaders, because when you look at the data, we were having, based on the last 4 years before kind of 2024, if you looked at 2023 to 2019, we knew that there was about 200 to 220 new leaders every year at Ameren. Now, the majority of those, I will tell you, were promoted, which is great. It's good to be part of an organization that's doing most of that through promotion versus hiring people from the outside, but there was a little bit of both. Probably a 60-40 or 70-30 when you really look at kind of that breakdown. And so we knew we wanted to make sure that we were giving these individuals everything that they needed. And so we started about June last year. We got a group of people together, Part of them were other individuals that were in HR. But as I mentioned earlier, part of them were, I reached out to my friends in the learning community and said, hey, I would love somebody from your team to come and work on this project with us because we want that perspective. You guys might already have a new leader program in your area. You already have a perspective. You know your business. You know that part of the business. You know the field in a way that I'm never going to know the field. And so how do we pull all those individuals together? And we did that. We got a chance to get them, and they offered up. We had 6 or 7 people that are from the business that worked on this project, which was amazing. And so we also did it agile. So we got the team together in late June and trained them on Agile to make sure that they knew what that Agile methodology was, because they weren't a company that traditionally had used a lot of Agile. So it was really introducing them to the concept, introducing them to what it was, some of the things like MVP, what a Kanban board was, how we were going to use sprints, what a Scrum Master was, what a business owner was, all of those things, because they hadn't necessarily used that before. So we got them all together, taught them Agile, but also did some really great team building. We wanted them to feel comfortable. We wanted them to bring their point of view. We wanted them to disagree with each other. Like, that was all important. I think that's the best teams, when people feel comfortable and confident to disagree wildly with something that everyone else agrees with. I want that. I don't want groupthink. So we really made
Psychological
sure.
safety is essential. You're right for that.
Yeah. So we spent some time with them and just got them really comfortable with each other. Then in July is when we really started the sprints. Started with some needs assessment in the organization to understand, did we really know what they need? Of course, with Agile, it's about the customer. Are you getting what the customer needs? We started with some needs assessment for the people that had programs in these areas. And then we did focus groups. We got a whole bunch of managers together and new managers, and to understand, like, what did people need for this? What are we hearing? And we heard some things that weren't in other previous parts or previous versions of this training before. Things like, we need to know how to do a budget. Like, the budget process is hard here because Ameren makes money in a very different way than other organizations make money. And I don't necessarily understand it because maybe I came from somewhere that wasn't the energy industry before I came here. And even the people that had still were confused by things like that. So we got a chance to really build that program. And again, was for new leaders, about a 9-month program, synchronous and asynchronous. We had 5 key kind of synchronous offerings. 2 of them are in person, like Crucial Conversations. We also have Leading the Ameren Way. We also have Leader Essentials for things like Workday, talent processes, making sure you understand your role in compliance. When you sign up to be a manager, most time people don't really understand what they're signing up for from a legal perspective. And so we really wanted to make sure that people were aware of that as well. And then probably about 15 to 16 other tools and resources, Charles, that people can cherry pick when they need them. They're there when they need them. They can go and look at them. Some of them are CBTs. Some of them are great infographics. Some of them are even just sheets that help them, give them information about where to find certain trainings in certain areas. We have a great sheet that really talks about all the technology in the organization. Like, how do you use it? Where can you go to learn more about Workday? Where can you go to learn something about SailPoint and these other systems that we use? So that is really what we focused on, was content building, and then making sure we knew how we were going to deliver it to people. So we deliver it through our LMS, and it's a packaged offering. So people know exactly where they're at all times. They can sign up for everything that they want to. They can look at it. They can look at their progress. Their leaders can go in and look at their progress and understand where they are as well. And then, of course, we have some great reporting on the back end so that we know what the progress of individuals are that are going through that program. So it's still brand spanking new. It went out 5/1. We've got 60 people that have signed up for it currently at the moment, and we are just did the first 2 classes this week. But from what we've heard, some of the best classes that they've ever been to is what we're hearing from people, especially Leading the Ameren Way. And that was a 7-hour course. So that was some investment for people to be able to come and spend 7 hours learning and talking about leadership and what good management and good leadership looks like, and that you really need to do both to be a good leader in the grand scheme of things. So so far so good, but we have obviously a long road to go. I think a big part of this next couple months is going to be find out what's working and what's not. And then, as we often say with Agile, don't hate, iterate. We're going to figure out how we want to iterate those things.
I love it. I love the Agile framework, the design thinking framework. It's really effective. And some of the things that you said that I just wanted to highlight, all great training programs, they get stakeholder buy-in right from the start, and they make them part of that process so they feel some ownership. They do the needs assessments. And the one thing that you mentioned that not as many programs and companies do as they should is the attendees that are coming, what are your needs? Before we fully develop this program, tell us what you're seeing on the ground, the frontline supervisors or whatever manager group or leader group that you're bringing in. It's so essential to get their buy-in through their feedback initially so that you're addressing the needs that are the most relevant to them, because I see this a lot in other organizations. Senior leadership and the L&D department thinks they know best, right? So we're just going to do it what we think, but that doesn't always connect in the same way or have the same impact.
100%. I mean, that's what I love about Agile. When you think about Agile, it is about understanding your customer. And even beyond that, Charles, when I think about the things that we do in HR, the things that we do in talent development specifically, I think about everything with a product mindset, because everything that we do and everything that we're offering is a product, whether that's a program, whether that's a new infographic, whether that's a CBT, whether that's an experience that people are having in person, it's a product. And when you think about things as a product, and I encourage people in HR to try to get a little bit more of this mindset, then you're thinking about, okay, so what is the demand? What's the demand in the organization? How can I supply that demand? Because there's probably a lot of different ways to supply that demand, but what's going to be the best way to supply that demand? And I also like to think about things like time to market. That's an important one for me too, because that's something that we don't always think about in HR is time to market and speed to market is important. You have to get your tools, you have to get your resources out there. And the sooner you do that, the better. Because if you get them out there too late, people might not need them anymore. Or they may have moved on and had someone else build them for them, or they went out and bought something somewhere else to do that. And so that speed to market is really, really important, which means that you have to move away from perfection, which is hard for HR because it's benefits, it's comp, it's employee relations, it's all these things where you can't do those things wrong or you're going to get your organization in trouble. And
Yep.
so they strive for perfection. But when it comes to areas like talent development, like growing and developing people, you've got to move faster. You've got to get things out there faster. And you have to think about speed to market. You have to think about everything you're doing as a product, because that will help you get things out there quicker and things that the customers and the people in your organization want. And so that is kind of how I look at everything. But that also tends to work very well with Agile too, because it's a progress over perfection thing. It's a minimal viable product thing. It's, let's get it out there, even if it's 80%, if we're sure it's going to add value.
You're right. Iterate, test it, experiment, MVP, so essential in that agile framework. And that's one of the reasons, or a few of the reasons why it's so successful. Talk to me a little bit about IMS and how they partner with Ameren and what they're doing really to move the needle with leadership development at your company.
Sure. So, I mean, IMS has been really helpful, especially with that mighty middle. Because you got to remember, we've got all these programs. People can go through the programs, but what do you do when you're done? So you've done leads 4 or 5 years ago. Are you continuing to grow and develop yourself? Hopefully you are. And a lot of our leaders are. But some of them, much like anywhere else, it's time. People get busy. They don't get intentional with their development. So sometimes you need to put those opportunities in front of them so they can continue to grow and develop. And so we've, over the last couple of years, have continued to grow our attendance in IMS, which I think is great. If you go back and look at like 2022, I think we had like somewhere around 250 people go to some of the free programs that you guys offer and other types of programs as well. By that next year, 2023, by the end of that, we had added another 100 people that were going to your programs, which was great. But then around April this year, I do have somebody on my team named Alejandro. He is a marketing guy. Like, he's an HR guy, but he's a marketing guy. Like, he truly is a marketing guy in every single way. Like, maybe even more than me. And I'm a marketing guy, but he's even maybe more of a marketing guy. But he's like, you know what? I have this list of people who are past graduates of our leads program. It's about 600 people. I'm going to start connecting and reaching out to them about some of these offerings that IMS has. And I'm going to do it in a timely way. So I'm not going to send it to him 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out, 6 weeks out. I'm going to send it. The first time he did it was in April when you guys had Michael coming. And he sent it out about 2 days before that session. And I think you guys called us the next day and said, Brendan called me and said, hey, you guys had 70 people sign up overnight. Like, what the heck did you guys do? And what Alejandro was doing was marketing directly to that group. Like, who is the group that we know is the audience for this, instead of plastering it across the organization or just focusing on putting it out in whatever communication avenues that you have in your organization. He was getting very targeted. He also wrote a very nice email and really kind of an exciting email about like, don't miss out on your opportunity. We're thinking about your development. And he also, this sounds a little old school, but he did a mail merge because it felt very personal, like it came from him. And people literally responded to him with like, thank you for thinking about my development, Alejandro. And we had over 100 people show up to that April session,
Wow.
which is crazy. And then that next month we did it again. We took a little bit of a different way. We sent it out about a week before, and then a reminder like those 1 or 2 days before. We had another 93 show up at the session in May. So we're excited to keep trying out. Again, experiment. I think we figured out how to crack the nut a little bit because it's hard. We're a big organization. We have 9,200 people. There's no good one bullhorn when it comes to getting communications out. Our internal communications group does a great job. They send out great information, but not everybody looks at it. Field people don't look at this. Office people don't look at this. Some people look at Viva Engage, but some people don't. So there isn't that one bullhorn. I feel like once you get to a mid-sized, big organization, you just don't have that anymore. You don't have that one thing that everyone listens to unless it's your CEO saying, hey, listen to me. I'm doing this speech, and then everyone's going to listen and watch that. But how often do you really get a chance to talk about the work that you're doing in L&D in that type of a format? Not very often. So it's trying to really figure out how do you crack the nut from a marketing perspective. And that's for everything that we do. It gets back to the product thing. You can have an amazing product. Think about the amazing products that are out there that fell on their face because they didn't know how to market themselves. And us in L&D have to think about that same thing. But part of it is understanding your organization and how can you crack the nut on marketing in that organization. So I feel like at least with IMS, and we're going to keep continuing to use this kind of approach of targeted marketing to specific individuals in the organization, but that's been working out really well for us. In fact, he used it for his leads program too. Last month, he had about 15 spots open for his new class of leads. He sent a message out to a very targeted group of people that were newer leaders that had been there for just on that cusp of being a year, who had gotten the program delivered to them the year before. And he not only filled his session for April, he's filled one is for June, he's filled one for August, and he's filled his late fall session, and he has 15 people on the waiting list. So how can you use he likes to talk about it, and I agree with him, use your data. Are you using your data, your people data that you have in the right way? Are you thinking about it with a marketing mindset? You have access to a lot of data. We know who cares about their development and growth. Are you plugging into that group again? Who are those people that want your product? Who are demanding it? How can you get that supply in front of them? And IMS is a great way to help continue to grow and develop people because you guys have such good quality programming. And people love the people that you bring in and getting a chance to hear from them. And so it was just about getting that information into that group, into that mighty middle the right way so that they continue to keep consuming it and help grow and develop them when maybe they're not even thinking about their development. Again, we're hitting them with it because they might not always be thinking about it, but they're like, oh, I've got an hour. I think I might want to do that.
That's great to hear because it's such a challenge for every organization to get people to come to their learning and development opportunities, whether internally or the partners they have, like with what you have with IMS, with Ameren, and love some of those strategies that you employ, right? It's an internal push. It's very specific, targeted, and you show that you care about that person. You're customizing it for their needs because when they feel like, wow, they really care about me, they know my development and where I need to be, and this would be a good program, a good topic for me to further develop in this area. I've seen it time and time again. It makes a huge difference. And they're definitely more receptive to responding to something like that, whether it be an email, a call, a text, whatever it may be, than it is just a generic email or putting it on the LMS or having it within a monthly newsletter or announcement. It just gets lost in the mix. And like you said, learning and development doesn't take center stage in any of those forms. It's a kind of a byproduct. It's you kind of just scroll over it until you get to something from the CEO or you get to something where you think, okay, I need to know this for my job.
Yep, 100%. So you've got to figure out what are those ways to do that.
Moving forward, if you had a crystal ball, 3 to 5 years out, what do you think may be an opportunity and a challenge is for the learning and development industry moving forward?
Oh gosh, yeah. I think there's so much going on in this industry right now, and there's so much going on with leadership. There's so much going on with talent development, with people, with work. The first thing that I think is an area that a lot of organizations have started focusing on, even us, but I think there's still more work to do, not only at Ameren, but every other organization, is leaders still don't exactly know how to lead in this new world. So I know we had the pandemic and everybody really had to learn how to be more of a human-centric leader, because we are seeing this change from, instead of just being a command and control leader, to also making sure that you're a human-centric leader. I think there's this finding this balance between this. And it's been the extra confusion of, okay, so now I've been fully remote. Okay, so now we're starting to come back in the office some. Now organizations are asking people to come back in the office more, but you still might not see everybody every day. And you still kind of have this hybrid environment going on, or you might have a fully remote team depending on where you're working, because you might be at an organization where it's still fully remote. It's confusing. Managers are tasked with more than ever these days. They have more and more on their plate. They're trying to manage these different dynamics around their teams. They're trying to keep them engaged. They're trying to make sure that they're creating a vision for them. And they're trying to make sure that they've got connections and are growing these people as well. And it's just a lot. We're in this age of this player, coach, player, manager, the coach manager, the player, coach, manager. And it's rough. I think we've been in a scenario where most managers at any organization I've been at, quite honestly, are doing more individual contributor work than I think they should be doing. We're not really giving people enough time to be a manager sometimes at a lot of organizations. Some departments are better than others. I think some groups better than others, some organizations better than others. But if you talk about management in a broad perspective, I think that's one of the things, this whole idea of like everybody being a player, coach, manager. What's going to happen? Well, most organizations actually lean towards incentivizing you for being the player. They incentivize you for making sure that you're doing this specific work, or selling this, or doing that, or doing the widget work, not the management and the leadership work. So I'm a little worried about that just in the general United States, maybe globally, but especially for the United States. I think it's a problem in almost every single company. So that concerns me a little bit. Something that I think we have to think about. How do we make sure that managers are good human-centric leaders, but can manage between that and also still you have to still hold people accountable. I'm not one of those people that's like, everything needs to be super empathetic and you have to be a constant empathetic leader yes, I want you to care about your people and make sure that you take care of them, but you also have to hold them accountable, because we're still a business. So you can't just say, oh, that's all right, we can just move that deadline 4 months. Not a big deal. That's not going to work 99% of the time, especially when we think about things like speed to market. So that's an important one. That to me is a big one, Charles. That's the big first one for me.
Is there a leadership level that you're most concerned with moving forward, that they're not developing the way they need to for corporations really to succeed? I see this a lot and I get different answers from different corporations. They usually center around, the succession planning's not there. A lot of people are still retiring from the workforce. So moving into those senior roles, they're really worried about that middle level to make sure they have those skills. But I'm curious to see what you think about that, and if there's a leadership level that you think is really kind of underrepresented or needs more development in order to progress to the next level.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's two groups that I think are kind of interesting when we look at all of this. One, yeah, we do know that a lot of those senior leaders are starting to retire. I mean, we know that a lot of them hung on, and those baby boomers were still hanging on. That 2018 crash, or 2008 crash back in the day, it wasn't great. Some of them decided to stick on for a little bit longer to do that. So we always knew that there were more baby boomers than the next generation. We always knew it, but it felt like we ignored it for 20 years. Like, we kept talking about it. You'd see the occasional article about it, but companies weren't really doing anything to know, oh yeah, like most of my senior leadership is going to retire and walk away soon. And what am I going to do about that? Because the next level of leadership, there isn't that many people to be able to take over everything 99% of the time. And so I felt like we ignored it. So yes, I think getting almost that manager, director type of individual ready to be that officer or ELT member at some point in the organization, I think that's a big one. I think that's huge. The other area, which I don't know if the people you talked to had said this or not, that I think a lot of organizations maybe ignore, is that emerging leader. So when you think about a leadership pipeline being a funnel, Because it's going to start with more leaders and then a little bit less leaders, less until you get to what? Maybe a dozen people at the top. And so if you think about it as a funnel, a lot of organizations aren't putting the time and the energy in helping people understand what it means to be a good leader or what their leadership why is, or even enticing or encouraging people to become a leader. Maybe in certain organizations, it's too much. Like people look at it and go, "Whoo, I don't want to do that." Like really helping people understand what the realistic job preview of being a manager and a leader is. So I think at the top, almost the top part of our funnel, like, are we doing what we need to in that middle to top part to make sure that the right people are funneling up to the top? Do we have enough people there? And then are we putting enough people in the funnel in the first place? Because if we're not putting enough people in the funnel in the first place, guess what? It's going to peter out halfway through the funnel. So you need to get more people in it in the beginning in the first place. So I feel like a good, solid emerging leader program that helps people understand what management is, what to expect, what that realistic job preview is, what their why is. Are they doing it for the right reasons? They want to become a manager for the right reasons? Do they know what they're getting into? Quite honestly, because we've seen a lot of people that just get promoted because they're really good technically at what they do, but not necessarily have an interest in people or helping a team or creating a vision. It's just that I'm a really good accountant, I'm a really good engineer, but that doesn't mean you're going to be a good leader.
Absolutely. You're judged by a whole different set of metrics. I hear that a lot from those that move into leadership roles as kind of a bait and switch. I got into this position, Charles, because I was good technically. I could do my job. I was very proficient. But now I'm being judged by a whole different set of skills that I don't have, I wasn't trained on, and people expect me to have or just learn on the job. And that makes leadership development essential. And it really is needed right at the start so that they start out with the right habits and they don't perpetuate some of the bad ones that they might have encountered, throughout the way or learn the wrong way from people around them. So critical. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining me today on the podcast, and remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, I think the best way to connect with me and follow up with me and see kind of what I'm doing and what I'm talking about is definitely my LinkedIn. So I would encourage people to go out, check out my LinkedIn. I think any of the podcasts that I'm on, I've got all of those out there. I think I've got an article that I wrote recently on management leadership that's out there that's posted. Also, just find out the work we're doing. I do like to talk a lot about the work that we are actually doing at Ameren. So you'll get a little bit of thought leadership, a little bit of practical in what we're actually doing in day to day, and maybe the occasional funny meme, but things that'll probably be worth your time.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.